should be great. So welcome in. Just some reminders, just make sure you mute and you can stop your video to have a better viewing experience. So today we have Dee and David Simpson here with us. David has led tours for 30 years. He has an incredible amount of knowledge on Florida's fauna, flora, pretty much all natural things. Knows a lot about land management and natural history. Dee is a Florida master naturalist, designs the classes they teach, and has a daily blog that she uses to educate people on the wonderful nature that our state has to offer. So now I'm going to hand it over to you guys, and you can start your presentation.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Wait, I haven't not showing yet. Where our presentation go? There it is. Sorry, that's not it. I apologize.
Here in a second. Okay, there we go. All right.
Awesome.
Oops, sorry, I gotta make it a little bit smaller if I can. There we go.
All right. Welcome to our talk about pelagic birding. Pelangic birding is a phrase coined by a friend of mine, Charlie Ewell from Fort Myers, about looking for pelagic birds, ocean-going birds from the land, which is actually my favorite way to do it because I don't like being on boats that much. So this is one of the species that we see a lot on the East Coast here. These are the Pomeranian Jaegers. This was actually taken on the Gulf Coast in the springtime, but we'll pretend these guys were going south on the east coast of Florida, rather. But you can see, and we'll get into the identification a little bit later. So I don't know, got 41 slides in 30 minutes, so we're gonna have to move through pretty quickly. It seems like I'm rushing. It's because I am, but okay. These are the weather conditions that we're looking for. This is my wonderful artwork here. A lot of these birds that we're looking, the Jaegers, Savins gulls, other things like that, they're coming out of the tundra and up in the Canada area, and they're migrating on that H represents a high pressure system. And the winds, when they come around, if you see high pressure systems sitting off the Carolinas and you've got those winds rotating around, bringing the birds out of the tundra and then kind of slamming them into the coast of Florida here, that's what you're looking for, the conditions. And they'll come and they'll hit the coast and they'll just kind of build up as they're moving south. And so the best place, you can see a couple highlights there. Cape Canaveral would probably be the best place to go. But if you show up out there with binoculars and a scope, they're not going to let you on the Air Force Base. So your next best bet is to go up at Canaveral National Seashore, just north of there. And that's your best place to go look for pelagics on the east coast of Florida. So we'll move up to next. Next is a couple of screenshots from Windy, the Windy app. And it shows the one on the left is what you're kind of looking for. You see these winds are coming out of the northeastern United States, swinging around, hitting the Gulf Coast, hitting the east coast of Florida there, and piling the birds up for you. Second one there is when the hurricane, I think that was, I don't know if that was Nicole or Ian that's sitting up there, but if you went out there and you look and say, hey, these northeast winds are great. We should be getting a lot of movement, but look at what the winds are doing up to the north. They're swinging around and taking the birds out towards England out there. So you might still get some flights on a day like that, but you're just going to get stuff coming down from from Jersey and that area, and the Carolinas, not so much out of the tundra. So you're always going to see something, but your best day is going to be when you get the conditions like you have on the left there. So always look, the Windy app is a great app. If you don't have it and you want to know what's going on nationwide wind wise, get that. It's a great app. I didn't have that when I was you kids' age, but anyways, so go on next one. So when do we go? The best time is in the fall. Late August through early December is the best time frame. I'll go down and see. Late August, early September, you still got storm petrels sitting offshore out there. You get some of the earlier Jaegers, long-tailed Jaeger and parasitic Jaeger are more likely to come in around that time. Shearwaters will still be around in that time period. You won't get a huge number of birds at that time. You don't get the big numbers like you get around this time of year, but you might get some interesting stuff. It's the best time to get a long-tailed Jaeger, is late August, early September. There's also quite a few swallows moving through at that time, and they tend to drop off later on. September, you start picking up more shorebirds, some of the early gulls, the laughing gulls come in, parasitic jaegers start to pick up. October, you may get a lot of peregrine falcons. You'll start seeing things like scoters, and Pomeranian jaegers will start to pick up in numbers. November is huge for Pomeranian jaegers, and gannets start to show up, and a lot of ducks are moving by, a lot of scoters. And once you get into early December, a lot of those things, shearwaters and stuff have probably left, swallows have mostly left, but you'll get massive, massive flights of gannets. You may see thousands of gannets going by, and you'll see all of the different plumages of gannets, which is pretty remarkable. And you'll get ducks, and you never know what else you might get out there. You see coots out there and all kinds of weird stuff. So move on. So what do you want to bring? A good telescope and binoculars is really good, of course, like especially with pelagic birding, a scope is really, really helpful, because these birds, these flight lines will sometimes be a mile or two offshore, and it can be very frustrating if you don't have a lot of experience. So don't worry too much about having to identify everything that flies by you. It's, don't be, if you're doing eBird, and you should be doing eBird, don't worry about putting down Jaeger species, duck species, anything like that. Nobody's going to laugh at you for that, and that's good. You often have a lot of salt spray out there, so you probably want to bring a little squirt bottle and some lens cloth, because your optics will get covered in salt water, and you don't want to leave it like that for very long. Rain gear, if you want, some of these days you may have squall lines coming in, so if you want to stay out there, you want to wear rain gear, and maybe a light jacket. If you're from Florida like me and can't take the cold that well, bring a jacket or something like that out there too, because it can get cold on some of those good days. So, okay. And the sea watch, I didn't bring up a graphic for this, but there's a book called the Sea Watching Guide. I think it might be part, I don't know if it's part of the Peterson series, but look for Sea Watching Guide. Cameron Cox and one other guy I don't remember the name of did that based on their experience, years of experience doing sea watches at Avalon up in Cape May. And they have really, really good pointers on how to identify ducks and how to use the flock shape to tell what kind of ducks there are, and how to pick out oddballs and hawks and everything else, and to some extent shearwaters and other pelagic type birds. It's one of the best guides out there. Cameron's one of the best birders you'll ever meet if you ever get the chance to meet him. He does come to Florida from time to time, but yeah, the Sea Watching Guide, look that up, get it. It is probably the best resource for doing pelagic birding. Nice. Okay, I can't see the top there, so why are we going to the band rock petrol already? But I thought that was at the end. But
I can't figure out how to. Can you see the title?
no, I know what the title is. It's at the end.
Okay, I thought you were asking me to. Yeah.
Well, no, but anyways, this wasn't supposed to be the first. Yeah.
Wait, that's what comes next.
Okay. Oh, okay. So storm petrels, you may see storm petrels in August and September. They will really drive you nuts if you haven't seen them before. They all look pretty much the same. They're about the size of a purple martin or so. The flight patterns are really a big help. The white in the tail and the way they fly is a good one. This is kind of a classic shot. This is most likely Michael Brothers' picture, not mine here, but band rump storm petrels tend to do this shearwater like this arcing arced wings, and they kind of teeter back and forth, and unlike the other storm petrels, go forward again, one to see where, yeah, oh, band rump got out of place there. I'm not sure how that happened. Anyways, okay, this is what was supposed to be first. Laughing gulls. This is one of my terrible pictures here, which is, it's a pretty good picture. Laughing gull is the most common gull we see in Florida. They're the only ones that breed here, so they're pretty much the only one that's here during the summertime. This is an immature laughing gull. You can kind of see they're very dirty looking underneath. They have that kind of, they're gray on the back, they have a black tail, black wing tips, and just kind of overall kind of smudgy and dirty. Go to the next one. This is from the top. You can see that brown panel in the wing there, and look how solid black the tips of the wings are. Immature laughing gulls will, in their first winter, they'll have that brown panel in the wing. Those are retained coverts from when they were juveniles. and they have black, just solid black primaries. The Franklin's gull, and I think that'll be next on here. Franklin's gull, you can see a little bit of that panel. This is probably actually in the springtime, not the fall, but this is from Steve Mlodnow. Yeah, okay, it does say on there, Steve Mlodnow, who has a really interesting blog. He's a good photographer. He's from out in Nebraska, so he sees a lot more Franklin's gulls out there. Notice it has some brown on the wing there, is that brown panel, and it has white tips on the primaries there. If you see a laughing type gull and it has a brown panel and white tips, you're probably looking at a Franklin's gull. You're not going to look at very many of them. I've been to the dump in Cocoa and had literally 20,000 laughing gulls out there, and there were 2 Franklin's gulls amongst them. So figure on about 1 in 10,000 out there. But the other interesting thing, if you look at the head on the Franklin's gull rather, it has that kind of a half hood look. Laughing gulls never have quite that solid of a black hood there, and they have those big bushy eyebrows, at least on the back part of the eyebrows there. And there's a smaller bill, they're smaller in structure. Let me move on to the next one there. You can kind of see the bill a little bit better in that one. But look at those big bushy eyebrows. That laughing gulls never have that, or that solid black half hood like that in their immature plumage. I'll move up next. And so that's another one there, kind of. That's borderline adult there. That's a spring bird there, actually. So you happen to catch one in the springtime, but ideally you get them sitting next to each other on the beach. But when they're flying by, see how clean white these things are. They're not as smudgy like the laughing gulls are. And you can see kind of a comparison of the two there. The white tips on the wing on the Franklin's gull, the big bushy eyebrows, and that just clean white on the flanks there behind, and the neck and everything. The back of that laughing gull has kind of got gray on it. It's got the gray sticking down on the side there. No white on the tips of the wings there. So it took me, I drove myself crazy looking at immature laughing gulls in Florida for the longest time, trying to find a Franklin's gull. And there's so much variation. I went to Texas for the first time and saw a Franklin's gull, and I said, oh, they're actually pretty easy. They're smaller build. They got that half hood. So once you actually find a Franklin's gull, it clicks in your brain a lot better. But before you do that, you're going to drive yourself nuts on these laughing gulls. So go ahead. And so now we're getting to the Michael Brothers photography here. This one, after hurricanes or late summer and fall, you might get to see the tropical type terns, as we call them. Bridled and sooty terns, generally what they are. They're very black and white. Bridled tern has that little white collar behind the black. That is really hard to see. The tail pattern is also different. They're more gray in the middle and the tail. The thing I find most useful in separating bridled and sooty tern is that contrast between the dark wingtips and the gray coverts in the back on this one. Move to the next one. You can see that again here. Also, if you happen to catch the underside of the wing there, look how extensive the white is on the primaries on this one. Sooty tern is much darker underneath the wing and has a solid black on the back. So the next one. So this one's a sooty tern. See how dark the tips of the wings are as compared to the bridled tern. And you can't see too well in this photo, but there's no white collar behind the black neck. And we'll move to the next one. I think he's got. And look how solid dark that is up top. And very dark central tail feathers. No white collar on it. Just sooty terns are very, very black looking on the top, and no contrast. It's uniform color, wingtip to wingtip on the top. That's your best field mark. If they're 2 or 3 miles out, you can still see that contrast usually if you've got decent light. Even in bad light, the contrast versus not contrast in the upper part, that's the best field mark I've found to separate those two. But again, don't worry if you just have to put sooty/bridled down. It happens to all of us. So that's a good direct comparison there. Collar on the bridled tern underneath, the grayish back, grayish central tail feathers, contrast between the darker tips. That one's really washed out on the wing on the top there, but bridled tern much darker in the tail, and just solid, no contrast on the top there. That's the best mark. I've seen a lot of these, and that's the best thing I found to separate those two species. So that's the comparison to the underside. It can be hard to see that, but if you do see that white bleeding all the way up into the primaries on a bridled tern versus solid dark on sooty tern, that's another good mark that you can get. That's harder to see, like I said, but you get to see it, good for you. So move on. Okay. Now this is what we saw at the beginning, the Pomeranian Jaeger. These are the big bulldogs of the Jaeger world. And we'll see a lot of these at this time of year going by in big flocks a lot of times. The adults make it much easier. You see those long central tail feathers with the big spoons that kind of twisted into the tail there. That's the easiest way to separate them. But these guys have a big bill. They're big, heavy body compared to the other ones. If you see these big, when they fly, they're just on a mission. They're going straight in a line, and they don't really bounce around or anything. I had an interesting sight one time of there was one parasitic Jaeger with a line of Pomeranian Jaegers, and the Pomeranian Jaegers, they were just bulldozing along in their usual way, and the parasitic was just like, come on guys, let's go. He's kind of bouncing around the whole flock there because they're much more flighty than the Pomeranian Jaegers are. But a lot of times in a flock, it'll be all one species too. So if you can identify a few in the group and all the others are the same general size and build as that one that you were able to identify, particularly by the tail feathers, the rest of the group probably is also that same species. So move on to there. And these are a couple Pomeranians. These are nice springtime breeding plumage Pomeranian Jaegers here, but big, bulky, long bill, big spoon-shaped central tail feathers there. So move on up. So, and this one's a parasitic Jaeger. This is a dark morph. It's one of the interesting things about parasitic Jaegers is they come in dark morphs or light morphs. This one does have, it's a little bit more slender. It's not quite as barrel chested. This is an adult. It has those little spiky pointed tail feathers sticking out of the middle there. Adults are so much nicer than immature because they have those characteristic central tail feathers sticking out. But these guys are much smaller, much more buoyant, closer to the size of like a royal tern. If they're harassing gulls and terns, the size of them can come into play and separating them, because parasitics are distinctly smaller, but if they're out by themselves way out offshore, it's harder to tell which one it is. So we'll move on to. And that's a nice classic adult with a pointed central tail feather, no spoon shapes on them, much smaller bill relative and much more slender body and more slender wings than a Pomeranian Jaeger. So, and this one's the one we really want to see. This is an adult plumage breed. You rarely see adult long-tailed Jaegers, but they have that little pigeon-like head, and they're very slender and small compared to especially compared to Pomeranian Jaegers. But those central tail feathers can be up to 12 inches long, I think. And so if you get an adult, it's very distinctive. We rarely get that. The other thing is there's usually only two, you notice on the end of the wing, there's in this case 3 white shafts. That's pretty distinctive in long-tailed Jaegers. They typically only have 2 or maybe 3 white shafts showing on the tips of the wings like that. And that actually is a pretty good field mark. On the rare occasion you actually get a long-tailed Jaeger, you'll often see that. And this is a little bit more typical. Again, kind of small, but look how white those outermost primaries are, and the rest are fairly dark. This is an immature. This is what you're more likely to see. The tail feathers don't give you much of a clue, but the tail itself is actually literally longer on long-tailed Jaeger. And you'll pick that up if you see enough of them, you'll notice that. So move on. So, and this is a nice comparison, direct comparison of Pomeranian. Look how long-tailed is in the front there. Look how much smaller, shorter build that thing is, much more slender looking instead of that big bruising Pomeranian that's coming up behind him there. But just that big pot-bellied look of that Pomeranian Jaeger. It takes a bit of experience to pick up on that, but that's what you're kind of looking for, is that bulldozing flight pattern of Pomeranian Jaeger versus the lighter of the parasitic and long-tailed Jaegers. So the other thing you'll see out there, the tube nose, is the Corey shearwater. Is the most common of the shearwaters that we see during the summer and fall, at least. Kind of beige on top, white underneath. Big long wings, often held in a big arc. Yellow bill if you're close enough to see them. But you will see these often on windy days. In southeast Florida, where the Gulf Stream is only about 5 miles out, sometimes you'll see these on just normal days. Up here, the Gulf Stream is a little further up. I say up here, like Brevard County, where I grew up, it's about 30 miles offshore. It takes a little bit of wind to blow those guys in. That's a nice classic. You'll notice it says borealis. There's probably 2 different species of Corey shearwaters. I won't get too much into that right now, but notice how the wingtips are dark on this one. The other one is This one here is the Scopoles, which breeds in a different area than the Borealis ones. And see how that white kind of bleeds into the tips out there. So that's another interesting identification challenge you can try. Right now, they're considered different subspecies, but that may change at some point in the future. So it'll become more important to see the underside of the wings on them. So the other species we sometimes see, and we get these in the springtime sometimes, if there's a really strong southeast wind, sometimes they get blown up to the shore as they're coming by. That's the great shearwater, much darker, got a black cap and a little white collar on the back there. They're actually a little bit bigger than Porey shearwaters, but it's not necessarily evident when you see them. This one, you can actually see the lower wing is shearing the water. That's how they got the name shearwater. They fly with their wings in a big stiff arc, and they kind of teeter back and forth, and they look like they're actually, I don't think he's literally shearing the water, maybe he is, but that's how they got the name shearwater. Their wingtips kind of shear the water. But these are another one. This is probably the second most common, at least at times, offshore and even from shore. Go on to the next. And then Audubon shearwaters actually breed in the Bahamas, so we could potentially see them any time of year. But these guys, they fly a little bit different. Notice how they're really small, got that little squarish tail, very black and white, very long, narrow wings, and they have a much more fluttery flight than the other shearwaters. So they will do the classic arcing flight that shearwaters do, but they do a lot more stiff-winged, fluttery flights, and they're very small, very black on top, very white underneath, and we will see them with some regularity, usually offshore, but and then can't see the. Well, I think, yeah, this looks like Audubon shearwater too. We can't see the top of the screen on our screen here, but can you move that?
I think I have to escape to do it for a
No,
sec.
okay, no, it's fine. But very dark on the wingtips. Again, with the wingtips, the white bleeding into the wingtips is often a really good field mark. The Manx shearwater, which is more often found in the North Atlantic and over in England area, and breeds over in that area, they come down here in the wintertime and they have more broader wings and more extensive white underneath. I think that's next on the oh no, we got sooty shearwater. Okay, I may not have done Manx shearwater. The other one, this one is very close to shore. Sooty shearwaters, especially in the springtime, they're the most likely to be close to shore in the springtime. There's a lot of sightings in April and May of them. I still have yet to see one in Brevard County, my home county. I've seen them in several other counties from shore. Mostly very solid dark, but they have very silvery wing linings on them. They're dark on top and bottom on the body, but that big silvery, this doesn't show it quite as well, but it can be a very silvery white flash underneath. This is the one, if you're in California on the Pacific Ocean, you'll literally see hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of these. In the Atlantic Ocean, you'll see one down here in Florida, if you're lucky. I've never seen more than one in a day, and I haven't seen very many of them, but this is one, if you do happen to be out in the springtime, it's one of the more likely ones to be seen in late April and May, and more likely to be seen near shore, actually. So, okay, there's the Manx shearwater. It's got broader wings, and it looks a lot like the Audubon shearwater, but the wings are a little bit more broad. The white extends a little bit further into the wing there. They have a little different flight pattern, a little stronger flight pattern, not as fluttery, a little bit more deep, but that's a bit of an advanced topic. You're probably not going to see Manx from shore. I think I may have seen one from shore, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Again, broader wings, more extensive white underneath, longer, more white under the tail as well, actually. Audubon shearwater has much more black underneath the tail, so that's a little out of focus, but it's actually a great ID shot, because this is often what you're going to see. You don't get textbook looks a lot of times when you're out looking for birds from the beach, looking for pelagic birds from the beach there, so. Now we get back into the storm petrel. This is classic Wilson storm petrel. They do the little feet patter. If you see a little, brown and white bird, really extensive white on the tail. You see how the white extends from the rump all the way down underneath the tail. Short little bill, rounded wings, very kind of paddle-shaped wings, and often paddling on the water. These guys like Cheerios and popcorn. So if you're out on a boat and you're doing a pelagic trip, you'll often see people throw oil and popcorn or Cheerios or something out behind the boat, and these guys will come in and follow you. And if you go on the party boats to go fishing, these guys will sometimes follow the boats around all day long and just kind of patter around and pick up whatever scraps of bait are out there. Next. And then the Leach's storm petrels, occasionally we will get some really good good amounts of them in the springtime when the winds are blowing really hard out of the southeast. The white is pretty much just on the top of the rump. It doesn't bleed down to the bottom as in the Wilson storm petrel. They have a bit of a notched tail and kind of long pointed wings. They actually fly a bit like a nighthawk. So if you've seen a nighthawk flying around with those long pointed wings, these have a bit of a nighthawk like flight to them, and that can be a good ID on them. And that's a little bit more close up. They also have this little worn panel in the wings a lot of times. That little bit of a window. That's the worn coverts. Those coverts are about probably 6 months older than the rest of the feathers, which is why they're kind of worn looking like that. So they don't molt all the tail feathers at the same time, but fairly pointed wings, and maybe the second most common behind Wilson storm petrel in Florida here. So, and that's the band rump storm petrel again with the a little bit of white coming down below, but a broader band on the rump and more rounded wings and more of that shearward arced winged flight on them. Also a little bit darker than Wilson storm petrel, but judging the darkness is gonna be a little bit tough on some of these things. Hey, we came way under 30 minutes, like 25 minutes. How about
We got
that?
5 minutes for questions.
We have 5 extra minutes for questions, actually. But yeah, but this is our contact information here. My somewhat out-of-date website and contact information, and then Dee's blog, which gets updated every day. She has the wildlife blog, and you can contact us. We're willing to do other classes and stuff like this and talk with groups. And I do private bird guiding. Sometimes Dee gets a chance to come out with me too. So I guess we'll have a little bit extra time for questions if you guys want. Hopefully you have some. So.
And I'll throw it back to